My name is Henry Ridge. I'm 32, and for the last decade I've spent my nights in an ambulance, racing against time to save people I'd never met. I've seen blood, grief, and goodbyes, but nothing prepared me for the night my own life flatlined. It started with a sharp pain in my chest during a rescue call. 1 second, I was pressing my hands on a patient's wound. The next, I was the one on the stretcher. My team rushed me to St. Luke's ICU. When I woke up, my parents were gone. No note, no wallet. My hospital wristband even had the wrong birth date. A nurse said softly, "Your parents left in a hurry," said they had to get home. But the word home suddenly felt like a language I didn't understand. An hour later, 2 detectives came in. One held an old missing child flyer, edges yellowed, face faded. "Henry Ridge," he said quietly. "This photo was taken 30 years ago." I laughed, confused. "That's impossible. I was born in 1993. He slid the file across the bed. "Then why does this one say 1992 and match your DNA? That was the moment I realized my parents didn't leave the hospital. They ran. If this story made your heart stop for a second, hit subscribe for more true inspired stories about family secrets, betrayal, and justice. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Your city might be part of the next story. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of machines and the sting of disinfectant in the air. The ceiling lights blurred above me as I blinked, trying to remember how I got here. My throat was dry, my chest ached. A nurse leaned over and smiled gently. "You're lucky, Henry. You scared us last night. Your parents said they'd be back soon." Parents. The word felt heavier than usual. I turned to the empty chair beside my bed, and their coats were gone. So were my clothes, my wallet, and even my phone. I asked the nurse to call them, but every number came back disconnected. By noon, a different nurse handed me a discharge paper, only the name on them wasn't mine. It said Harold Ridge. My birthday was wrong, too. I laughed nervously, thinking it was a clerical error, but she frowned and said, "Sir, this is the name your family gave us." Hours passed. No one came back. Not a call, not a message. Just silence and that wrong name staring back at me from the chart. Then 2 detectives walked in, calm but focused. One set a file on the tray table and asked, "Mr. Ridge, can we confirm your identity?" I nodded, confused. "Yeah, of course. Henry Ridge, born in 93. The detective glanced at his partner. "Funny," he said, sliding the folder toward me. Inside was a faded photo of a toddler with the same scar under his chin as mine. "You were reported missing," he said slowly, "in 1992. The room went cold. I couldn't feel the IV in my arm anymore, only the echo of that sentence replaying in my head. My parents didn't just leave the hospital. They disappeared. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and paper dust. I sat under a buzzing fluorescent light, still wearing the hospital wristband that claimed I was someone else. Across from me, Detective Harris pinned something onto a corkboard. When he stepped aside, my lungs froze. It was a missing child flyer, printed in the kind of faded ink that only time makes. The photo showed a smiling toddler with a blue pacifier string clipped to his shirt. Beneath it, the name, Evan Dawson, age 2, missing since 1992. I stared harder, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The boy had my eyes, my crooked grin, and a tiny scar under his chin, the same one I'd gotten falling off my tricycle when I was 3. "That's not me," I muttered. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Detective Harris folded his arms. "You sure about that? Because that scar's 1 in 10 million, and your parents' story doesn't add up." I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's someone who just looks like me. He didn't smile. Instead, he pointed to a line in the report. "Evan Dawson vanished from St. Luke's Hospital. Same wing your parents worked in. Evelyn Ridge. Maiden name Evelyn Dawson. You see the connection?" My stomach twisted. Mom, or whoever she was, had been a nurse there before I was even born. The same place I'd been brought after my collapse. The same place this missing child disappeared from. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the rapid beat beneath my fingers. "So what are you saying? That I'm what? A kidnapped kid who grew up not knowing it? Detective Harris's expression softened, but his tone didn't. "We're saying we need proof. A DNA swab. We've already contacted the Dawson family. They've been waiting 30 years for answers." My head spun. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, a dull thud that matched the clock ticking behind him. "They think I'm their son?" I whispered. He nodded. "They don't just think, Henry, they hope." The room suddenly felt too small. Every breath tasted like antiseptic and fear. I wanted to walk out, to find my parents, to demand an explanation. But every piece of paper on that board was closing in, like the walls were telling their own story. The detective slid a small cotton swab across the table. "It's just routine," he said quietly. My hands trembled as I took it. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me already knew the truth. The cotton brushed against my cheek, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was stealing something back. My real name. Detective Harris labeled the vial and sealed it in an evidence bag. He looked at me once more before turning to leave. "Sit tight," he said. "We'll know in a few days who you really are." The door clicked shut behind him, and in the silence I realized I didn't know whether I wanted the results to come back, yes, or no. The results came faster than I expected. Maybe because deep down I already knew what they'd say. Detective Mara called me into her office, her voice clipped, her expression careful, like she was holding something that could shatter me. On her desk sat a sealed envelope stamped with the state seal. She slid it toward me without a word. I didn't open it right away. My fingers hovered over the flap, cold and trembling. "Just tell me," I said quietly. Her tone was gentle but firm. "Henry, the DNA test came back. You share 0 genetic markers with Evelyn and Thomas Ridge." It hit like a defibrillator to the chest. A jolt that didn't save, only stunned. I stared at the papers, the official words blurring through my tears. "0," I whispered. "That can't be right. They raised me." "They," Mara shook her head. "They're not your biological parents. And they're gone." I blinked. "Gone?" "They left town this morning. Packed up, withdrew everything from the bank. No forwarding address. They knew the test was coming. I felt my pulse spike. So they ran." "Yes," she paused. "And now we're reopening a 30-year-old case, the Dawson kidnapping. You're being placed under protective status until we confirm every detail. You're not safe until we find them." The room tilted. Protective status. Like I was a witness. Or worse evidence. I couldn't stop seeing Mom's face, her tired eyes, the way she'd tuck my hair behind my ear before every shift. I could still hear Dad's laugh echoing from the garage. None of it made sense. How could something that felt so real be built on a lie? Mara's voice softened. "You've been living under a false identity your whole life. It's okay to be angry." Angry didn't begin to cover it. I wanted to scream, to break something, to find them and ask why. But all that came out was a dry, shaking breath. "Who am I, then?" She looked at me for a long moment. "You're Evan Dawson, Henry. You were taken from the pediatric ward in 1992. We found the original file." The name hit harder than any truth I'd ever faced. Evan. It sounded foreign and familiar all at once. I stared at the badge on her desk, the reflection of a man I didn't recognize staring back at me. That night I didn't go home. They moved me into a safe unit near the station. Bare walls, thin blankets, a single light humming above the bed. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw my mother, or the woman who pretended to be driving away. The next morning Mara called again. "We found something," she said. "At St. Luke's Hospital the air was colder than I remembered. A custodian led us down a long corridor into the old staff wing. Most lockers were empty, dust-coated. But one, labeled E. Ridge, was sealed shut. He pried it open, and inside, beneath a folded uniform, lay a small blue blanket. The fabric was frayed, but the embroidery still shone faintly under the flashlight. 2 stitched letters, E.D. Evan Dawson. I pressed it to my chest, the scent of old detergent and memory flooding back. Mara whispered she kept it all these years. And in that sterile hallway the truth finally sank in. They hadn't raised me out of love. They'd kept me out of fear. The smell hit first, an antiseptic mixed with the faint sweetness of old paper. Evelyn Ridge's locker was a time capsule of a life built on someone else's heartbeat. I crouched beside Detective Mara as she laid everything out on a sterile evidence sheet. A folded nurse's uniform, a locket with no photo inside, and then, tucked beneath a cracked mirror, a small envelope. Inside it was a photograph. A toddler boy sitting on a hospital bed, one sock missing, smiling wide at the camera. My stomach twisted. It was me. The back of the photo had a scrawled note in blue ink, Unit 304. "What's Unit 304? I asked. Mara frowned. "Not a hospital room number. St. Luke's never had 300-level units." She flipped the photo over again, studying the faded stamp in the corner. But this was processed through county storage systems. "That's a private facility downtown." A chill crawled down my neck. Evelyn, my supposed mother, had hidden my photo, labeled with a place that had nothing to do with medicine. While Mara made the call for a warrant, I wandered through the old staff wing. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that remembers things better left forgotten. The locker's mirror hung loosely by one nail. Something metallic caught my eye behind it. I reached out and gently pried it off. A single key fell to the floor. Old brass, faintly rusted, with 304 stamped across the top. "Detective," I called softly, holding it up. "I think I found the map." Within the hour, we were parked outside county storage systems, a forgotten row of gray units tucked behind a half-collapsed sign. The wind rattled the chain-link fence as Mara and I approached Unit 304. The padlock looked ancient, its edges eaten by rust. I slid the key in. It turned with a slow, reluctant click. The metal door rolled upward with a shriek that cut through the air. Dust swirled in the beam of Mara's flashlight. Inside, stacks of old cardboard boxes lined the walls, marked with hospital inventory stickers. E. Ridge, Personal Files was written on the top one. My pulse climbed. Mara handed me gloves. "Go slow." We lifted the lid, and the smell of old ink and humidity escaped like a ghost. Inside were medical records, birth certificates, and a folder marked Adoption, Case Narration. My heart thudded. I pulled it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet, Petition for Adoption. My name is printed neatly across the top, but the line that made my vision blur read, "Approved by Judge Harold Denton, 1993. Mara whispered, "That can't be right." Judge Denton died in 1991. I stared at the page, his embossed seal, his signature. Then who signed it? I asked, my voice barely audible. Mara exhaled, eyes narrowing. Someone with access to his stamp. The paper trembled in my hands. My adoption wasn't adoption at all. It was forgery, official and deliberate. The flashlight flickered once as if the room itself wanted to breathe. And, for the first time, I realized Evelyn hadn't just stolen a child, she'd rewritten the law to keep him. In the corner of the locker, beneath the old papers, another envelope waited, sealed in red wax. Mara looked at me and said quietly, "Do you want to open it now?" But my hands wouldn't move, because something told me the truth inside that envelope would hurt worse than the lie I'd been living. The wax seal cracked with a sound sharper than I expected, like something sacred breaking. Inside the envelope were yellowed pages clipped together, the edges curling from time. Detective Mara and I sat on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit, the only light coming from her flashlight balanced on a box. The first document was typed in neat, old-fashioned script. Petition for private adoption. Case 42329. My name was at the top again. Next to Applicant, Evelyn Ridge. But halfway down, my eyes caught on something worse, a line of small handwriting scrawled in the margin, written in blue pen. Approved under special circumstances. Fund transfer to the county treasury is incomplete. See ledger for details. Find LD, mother refuses payout. I read it twice before whispering, LD. That's her initials, isn't it? Mara nodded slowly. Laura Dawson. Your biological mother. I swallowed hard. He wrote that 30 years ago. Mara's face tightened. Judge Denton's signature on these forms isn't the only thing fake. This whole adoption was a cover. He was bribed. Evelyn probably paid off clerks and used Denton's credentials after his death to legalize your placement. My chest felt like it was caving in. The edges of the paper blurred. So they bought me. Mara's voice softened. They bought silence. The note's words burned into my mind. My mother refuses payout. Laura Dawson didn't sell me. She fought them. That single line changed everything I thought I knew about my life. I wasn't abandoned. I was taken. "Detective," I said, my voice shaking, "I need to find her." She hesitated. "Henry, this case is decades old. If she's alive, she's been living with this pain for 30 years. We can't just barge in." "I don't care," I snapped. "She deserves to know her son's not a ghost." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the storage unit's light buzzed overhead, the sound steady, merciless. Mara picked up the next page. A ledger slip with faint banking codes printed along the bottom. "These routing numbers are ancient," she murmured. "But if we can trace the last deposit Evelyn made, it might lead us to where she and your father hid after the adoption." She took out her phone, snapping photos, fingers flying across the screen. Then her expression changed, the detective's stillness before she dropped something big. "What?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. "We found her." The image showed a property record. Laura Dawson, Cedar Grove, Kansas. The population barely a few thousand. My throat tightened. 2 states away. Mara nodded. If this is her, she never changed her name. Never stopped waiting. I folded the note carefully, pressing my thumb against the judge's fading handwriting. My mother refuses payout. Even dead men, it seemed, couldn't bury the truth forever. Mara stood, sliding the papers back into the evidence bag. "We leave tomorrow. If she's really your mother—" Her voice trailed off, but I finished it for her. "Then maybe I can finally go home." But as we shut the unit door behind us, a gust of cold air brushed my neck, like a warning. Because when you dig up old ghosts, they don't always want to be found. The drive to Cedar Grove felt longer than 2 states. Every mile pressed heavier on my chest. Detective Mara handled the wheel, eyes fixed on the endless stretch of highway while I sat in silence, holding the faded judge's note in my lap. Each letter of Find LD felt like a pulse, guiding me toward a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. By the time we reached the small Kansas town, the sun had already dipped behind the wheat fields. The address led us to a white farmhouse on the edge of a gravel road, quiet and still except for the faint sound of wind chimes on the porch. Mara parked a few feet away and looked at me. "You sure you want to do this tonight?" I nodded, my throat dry. "I've waited 30 years. I can't wait another minute." The porch creaked under my boots. My hand trembled as I knocked. For a moment, there was nothing but the rustle of cornfields. Then the door opened. A woman stood there, silver hair pulled back, eyes the color of worn denim, her face lined with both age and grace. She froze when she saw me. The air between us seemed to collapse. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You." Her eyes dropped to my left collarbone, where the faint crescent-shaped birthmark had always been. "Henry?" I swallowed hard. "My name's Henry Ridge, but I think it used to be Evan." She staggered back a step, her knees buckling. Mara caught her just in time as she whispered through trembling lips. "They told me you died." Her voice cracked on the last word. I knelt beside her, unsure if I should reach out or stay frozen in the shock. She looked at me like someone seeing sunlight after decades in a storm cellar, terrified it might vanish. Inside, her house smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Every wall was covered in photos, landscapes, family reunions, moments of time stitched together by survival. She sat on the couch, clutching a framed picture to her chest before passing it to me. It was a photo of a baby in a blue blanket, same birthmark and same crooked smile. Me. "I took that the day before you disappeared," she said quietly. "The nurse told me she was taking you for a routine checkup. I never saw you again." Her voice shook, but her eyes stayed fierce. "They told me a fire broke out in the nursery. They said the babies didn't make it. But I knew they were lying. I sued the hospital, and I went to every court I could find. Then the judge dismissed the case, saying there was no proof a baby was ever missing. Judge Denton. His name wasn't in the file by accident. Tears blurred my vision. I thought they were my parents. Evelyn and Thomas Ridge. Her face hardened. Evelyn Ridge. She was the nurse. She was the one who took you. The room spun. The world that had already cracked once split all over again. Laura reached for a small wooden box on the mantel and opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed and folded with care. She handed me one. The headline read, "Nurse Vanishes with Infant, Police Suspect Internal Cover-Up." The photo beneath it showed a younger Evelyn Ridge in her white uniform, smiling at the camera, my baby self in her arms. I stared at the image until my vision blurred. "She kept me," I whispered, "but not because she loved me." Laura's voice was soft but unshakable. "Because she couldn't let me have you." And as the paper trembled in my hands, I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Because somewhere out there, the woman who stole me was still running. The night after meeting Laura Dawson, sleep felt like a foreign language I couldn't remember how to speak. Her face, her voice, that headline, "Nurse Vanishes with Infant," looped in my head until dawn cracked through the motel blinds. Detective Marr was already up, laptop open, files spread across the bed like puzzle pieces. "Evelyn Ridge leased 2 more units under fake names," she said, eyes flicking toward me. "One of them was opened just 6 months ago, paid in cash." "Where?" "Same facility as before," she said, shutting the laptop. "Unit 5 on 12. Guess she didn't learn to hide better." By mid-morning, we were standing outside the corrugated steel door. The air smelled like rain and metal, heavy, old, waiting. Mara slid the master key into the padlock, the one we'd recovered from Evelyn's locker. The tumblers clicked. When the door rolled up, dust poured out like a sigh. Inside, boxes lined the walls, stacked to the ceiling, all marked with her handwriting, precise, emotionless, medical. One box in the corner caught my eye. Henry, 1993. My chest tightened. I knelt, brushed the dust away, and lifted the lid. Baby clothes, a tiny knitted cap. Old hospital bracelets with the name Evan Dawson were crossed out and replaced with Henry Ridge. Beneath them, a forged birth certificate with the same substitution. Printed on authentic hospital stock, but dated months after I was born. "She built your life like a file," Mara muttered. Fabricated, sterilized, sealed. Another box sat beneath it, heavier, labeled Insurance Claim Confidential. I lifted it carefully onto the floor. Inside were binders full of paperwork, policies, payout statements, and death certificates, all linked to one name repeated across forms, Noah Trent. Mara's brow furrowed. "That's an old name in the system. Insurance investigator. He handled medical fraud claims in the 90s. I scanned the forms, all listing the Ridge family's clinic. "She wasn't just hiding me," I said slowly. "She was collecting money. Fraud claims, settlements, forged deaths. She built a fortune out of fake tragedies." The bile rose in my throat. My entire existence, my childhood, my family, my name, had been funded by a lie. Mara leaned over the stack, flipping open a small, unmarked envelope buried under the forms. Inside was a cassette tape, labeled in neat red ink, T. Ridge, Final. She found an old recorder on the shelf nearby, plugged it into the power strip, and hit play. A click, then static. Then my father's voice. "If they dig," he said, his tone low, controlled, the kind of calm that only comes from guilt, "we lose everything. The house, the license, the boy. Evelyn, you can't let them trace it back." Mara froze, eyes wide. I could barely breathe. Static again. Then one more sentence, almost whispered. "Burn the files." "All of them." The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was colder than any truth so far, because now it wasn't just Evelyn who'd lied. It was both of them. And as the last echoes of his voice faded, I stared at the boxes of my stolen past and realized this wasn't about family anymore. It was about evidence. The next morning, the storage unit smelled like rust, rain, and rot. The scent of secrets long kept too dry to decay. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, papers spread around me in chaotic order. Each file told a story of someone who didn't exist. Someone Evelyn Ridd invented to feed her empire of lies. Detective Mara crouched beside me, latex gloves snapping as she opened another binder labeled Infant Claim, 1993. The pages were crisp despite the decades, notarized, stamped, and falsified with surgical precision. My eyes snagged on one number typed neatly in the payout section, $200,000. I stared at it, my pulse rising. $2.1 million. Mara nodded grimly. Filed under your original name, E. Van Dawson. Cause of death listed as respiratory failure after a hospital fire. Signed off by Evelyn Ridge, attending nurse. I laughed, a sound that cracked halfway into something closer to a choke. She killed me on paper. Worse, Mara said softly. She got paid for it. The insurance company's logo at the top of the page matched one still operating today. Noah Trent's signature was stamped at the bottom as the investigating officer. Clean, confident, final. He approved the payout, Mara said. Evelyn and Thomas must have used it to start their clinic, their house, everything. I looked around at the boxes, the hollow trophies of a stolen childhood. So every meal I ever ate, every birthday candle I blew out, was bought with the price of my fake death. The weight of it crushed the air out of my lungs. Rage simmered under my skin, but beneath it, a cold, methodical clarity began to form. Can we prove this? I asked quietly. Mara flipped through the final pages, then looked up. If these are real, and they are, it's still within the statute for fraud restitution. Insurance fraud that large doesn't expire under federal law. You mean you can claim it back, Henry, she said. Legally. Everything she built off that payout reverts to you. It's not inheritance. It's restitution. The word hit different. Restitution, not revenge. Not luck, justice. I rubbed my temples, trying to steady my voice. What about Noah Trent? He signed off on all this. Mara opened another folder, scrolling through her phone. He retired 15 years ago. But get this, he's still receiving quarterly payments from a Ridge Holdings account. So they kept paying him. Or he kept blackmailing them. The pieces clicked into place like teeth in a locked jaw. Evelyn and Thomas hadn't vanished out of sight. They were running because the paper trail they built 30 years ago was finally catching up. Mara packed the files carefully into evidence sleeves. Once this goes federal, they'll have nowhere to hide. I stood, staring at the box, the ghost of my stolen name still printed across its labels. For 30 years, my life had been an entry in someone else's accounting book. But not anymore. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering loose papers across the gravel. One landed at my feet, the insurance receipt stamped, Approved. I bent to pick it up, the ink faded but legible. Paper doesn't burn fast enough to hide guilt, I muttered. Mara locked eyes with me. No, she said, but it burns bright enough to light the way back. And as she sealed the evidence box, I realized the fire they faked 30 years ago was about to start again. This time, it would burn clean. The Ridge mansion looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because, for the first time, I was seeing it without the illusion of love holding it up. Police tape wrapped around the gates like yellow scars, and floodlights painted the marble walls in cold, forensic white. I stood beside Detective Mara as the search team moved in. This was your childhood home, she said quietly. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, guess it was never mine, was it? We stepped inside. The house smelled like polish and old lavender, the scent of Evelyn's cleaning rituals. Every shelf was still in place. Every photo is perfectly framed. But now, the faces in those photos felt like strangers wearing masks of people I used to love. Officers moved methodically through each room, snapping photos, bagging documents, and opening drawers. The silence of it all was worse than chaos, like the house itself was holding its breath. Detective, one of the officers called. You'll want to see this. We followed him to the study. A portrait of Evelyn and Thomas hung above the fireplace, her smile frozen, her hand resting on the shoulder of the man who helped her steal a life. The officer gently lifted the frame. Behind it, a small safe was set into the wall. Combination? Mara asked. I stared at the keypad, heart pounding. My fingers moved almost on instinct, typing in 6 numbers that had been burned into my brain since childhood, my supposed birthday. 110993. The lock clicked open. Inside was a stack of envelopes, a silver locket, and a leather-bound book, Evelyn's diary. Mara slipped on the gloves and handed them to me carefully. The first page was dated June 4th, 1993, a month after my birth. The ink was fading, but the words still carried a weight that felt like confession. We couldn't have kids. Thomas said it was a sign that God was giving us a chance to start over. The baby's mother won't stop asking questions. They're closing the case soon. We'll move to Iowa. He'll be ours then. Our Henry. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Entry after entry blurred together. Doctor visits, birthday notes, apologies written in secret. Some pages were stained, maybe with tears, maybe with something darker. He asked about his birthmark today. The kids at school teased him. I told him it was an angel's thumbprint. I couldn't tell him the truth. The words pressed down like weights on my chest. For all their crimes, there was a twisted tenderness in her guilt, a mother who had stolen love because she couldn't make her own. By the final pages, her handwriting grew shaky, desperate. Thomas says the past will find us. I can't sleep. The boy looks more like her every day. If he ever finds out, I froze. The rest of the line trailed off, the ink smeared from tears or sweat. At the bottom of the page, she'd written one last note. If he ever finds out, check the locket. Mara lifted the silver locket from the safe. It was old, tarnished, etched with tiny initials, H.R. I reached out, my hand trembling as the chain brushed my palm. "What's inside?" Mara asked quietly. I stared at it, heartbeat thundering in my ears. "I don't know," I whispered. But I think she wanted me to. And as the house settled into uneasy silence, I felt something shift. Not anger, not grief, but a grim kind of peace. Because whatever waited inside that locket wasn't just another secret. It was the final truth of the woman who stole my life, and gave me another one instead. It wasn't jewelry, it was evidence. The silver locket sat in my palm, warm from the light overhead, but it might as well have been burning. We'd brought it straight from the Ridge House to the evidence room at St. Luke's, the same hospital where this story had begun, and apparently where it had been rewritten. Detective Mara watched as I pried the hinge open with a small scalpel borrowed from one of the nurses. The clasp resisted, almost like it knew what it was hiding. Then, click inside was a faded photograph. A young woman with auburn hair, smiling shyly beside a man in uniform. They looked like the kind of people who believed the world was still kind. On the back, someone had written 2 words in shaky blue ink. Laura, Pas, Daniel. My real parents. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The walls of the room blurred. Every bedtime story, every school photo, every "I love you" from Evelyn. They all collapsed under the weight of that picture. Then Mara leaned in. "There's something under it." We both froze. A tiny metallic glint caught the light, a microfilm capsule wedged behind the photo frame. Mara carefully lifted it out with tweezers and held it up. "We'll need the lab to process this." But I already knew. My pulse told me. My bones told me. Whatever it was, Evelyn had kept it because even guilt can't erase truth. An hour later, the microfilm projected across the wall of the L.A., grainy, faded, but readable. The image sharpened, letters appearing like ghosts from another lifetime. State of Michigan. Official birth record name, Evan James Dawson. Date of birth, April 19th, 1992. Mother, Laura Dawson. Father, Daniel Dawson, Registered Hospital, St. Luke's Memorial, attending. Nurse, Evelyn Ridge. My throat locked. There it was, the original me. The life that had been stolen, filed away, and replaced with a lie named Henry Ridge. Mara exhaled softly. She didn't just kidnap you. She falsified a birth record under hospital authority. It's okay. I stared at the flickering projection, the words blurring through tears I didn't bother to wipe away. She worked the system from the inside. She gave me a fake birth, a fake death, and a fake name. Not anymore, Mara said quietly. With this we can restore everything, your name, your records, your legal identity. And she hesitated. Because of the insurance fraud, you're entitled to claim restitution. The Ridge estate, the trust, the assets, they're yours to recover. I shook my head slowly. I don't want the money. I know, she said, but it's not about wanting it. It's about reclaiming what they built from what they stole. I looked down at the locket again, the photographs still inside, their faces frozen in time, the parents who'd never stopped looking for me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. I felt real. Mara sealed the evidence bag and handed it to me. "We'll file the civil motion first thing in the morning," she said. I nodded, closing my hand around the locket. "Then tomorrow," I said quietly, "Henry Ridge dies." Mara met my eyes. And Evan Dawson finally gets to live. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence, steady and alive, like a heartbeat reclaiming its rhythm after 30 years in the dark. They raised me with lies. I buried them with truth. The courtroom smelled like old wood and disinfectant, the same blend of justice and decay that every courthouse seems to carry. I sat at the witness table, palms flat against the polished surface, the silver locket resting quietly in front of me. For the first time, I wasn't Henry Ridge sitting in judgment. I was Evan Dawson reclaiming his life. Detective Mara stood beside me, her posture steady, professional. Across the aisle sat the remnants of the Ridge family, their attorneys, their silence, their ruin. Evelyn wasn't there. Her health had failed somewhere in hiding. But Thomas was. He looked smaller now, his hands trembling as he stared at the floor, eyes refusing to meet mine. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Dawson," she said, the name echoing through the room like an answered prayer, "you may proceed." I rose, every heartbeat heavy but sure. 30 years ago, I began, voice low but clear, a nurse at St. Luke's Memorial faked an infant's death certificate. She and her husband used that child's insurance claim to build their home, their business, their life. That child was me. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Cameras clicked from the back row. I slid the folder across the table. NA results, the diary pages, notarized birth records, and the insurance fraud files. "Every lie they told me had paperwork to back it up," I said, "so I brought the paperwork to end it." The insurance company's representative took the stand next. His voice shook as he confirmed the payout from $199 to $1 million, issued under the name Evan Dawson, deceased. "This was processed under fraudulent documentation," he said. "We'll be pursuing full recovery and restitution under federal fraud statutes." Mara presented the final piece, the microfilm projection of my real birth certificate. The judge leaned forward, studying it in silence before speaking. "So the falsified identity, Henry Ridge, is hereby annulled," she declared, "and all corresponding assets derived from fraud shall revert to their rightful legal successor, Evan James Dawson." The gavel struck once. Clean. Final. The noise in the courtroom rose instantly, reporters whispering, strangers clapping softly, even the bailiff exchanging a look of quiet relief. I didn't feel triumphant, just hollow and calm, like a storm that had finally run out of wind. As we gathered the evidence, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. 2 officers were leading Thomas Ridge out of the chamber, his wrists in cuffs. He paused by my row, his face pale, eyes bloodshot. For the first time in my life, he looked afraid of me. "You were never supposed to know," he whispered. I met his gaze, steady. "But I do." He flinched, looking down, and the officers led him away. The door shut behind him with a sound that felt like 30 years closing all at once. When the judge adjourned, people came up to reporters asking questions, strangers offering sympathy. But I didn't stay for any of it. I picked up the locket, slipped it into my pocket, and walked outside. The air hit cold and clean against my face. For the first time, it felt like breathing didn't hurt. They had buried my name, my truth, my family. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It just waits for someone brave enough to dig it back up. The hardest name I ever learned was my own. It was printed in bold letters across the court document, stamped, sealed, and final. Evan James Dawson. The name felt foreign on my tongue, heavy in my chest, like it had been waiting for me all along. I signed the papers slowly, my hand trembling just enough to blur the ink. Detective Mara watched from across the table, a small smile softening her usual steel. "You did it," she said. "It's official now. You're home. Home." That word had haunted me for months. I wasn't sure what it meant anymore. A building, a memory, a person? But when I drove north that weekend, the answer came into view on a quiet suburban street outside Detroit. A white house with a blue porch swing and an overgrown maple tree out front. Laura Dosso, my real mother, stood waiting in the doorway. Her hair was grayer now, but her eyes, they were mine. When I stepped out of the car, she covered her mouth like she couldn't trust what she was seeing. Then she whispered, "Evan," and the sound of it broke something deep inside me. We didn't speak for a long time. We didn't have to. She just held me like a mother making up for 30 years of lost time, and I let her. The world went quiet except for the creak of the porch swing and the soft wind moving through the trees. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and cedar, the same way Evelyn's house had, but warmer, real. The walls were lined with framed photos, birthday cakes, Christmas mornings, vacations by the lake. There was one photo that stopped me cold. A toddler sitting in a sandbox, a tiny scar under his chin, grinning up at the camera. "That's you," Laura said, her voice breaking. "The last picture I ever took before you disappeared." I reached out and traced the edge of the frame. My chest felt tight, but for once it wasn't pain. It was recognition, proof that I had existed before the lie. Later that night, after dinner and too many tears, Laura brought out a small box. "The police found this when they cleared the Ridge house," she said softly. "It's addressed to you." Inside was an envelope, the handwriting unmistakable. "Evelyn Ridge." I hesitated, then unfolded it. The letter was dated 2 weeks before she died. "Henry, or Evan, if you found this, I don't expect forgiveness. What we did was wrong. I told myself I saved you, but I was only saving myself. I hope one day you'll understand that love built on a lie is still love. Just a broken kind. Please don't carry my sin longer than I did. Be who you were meant to be." By the time I reached the last line, the page was blurry. I didn't hate her anymore. I couldn't. She had stolen my life, but she'd also given me one messy, false, and twisted, but still mine to reclaim. I stepped outside afterward, the night sky stretching endlessly above me. For the first time, I said my name out loud. "I'm Evan Dawson." And it didn't hurt. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Detective Mara's name flashed on the screen. "Evan," she said, her voice tense. "We just got a hit on another cold file. Same hospital. Same time frame. The DNA match links directly to your case." The wind shifted, rustling the maple leaves overhead. I looked back at the house, my real home, then at the stars. "Send me the file," I said quietly. If they took me, maybe I wasn't the only one. Evan Dawes, once known to the world as Henry Ridge, didn't win by anger or by vengeance. He won through truth. His fight became more than a personal victory. It became a blueprint. The case of the stolen infant turned into a national precedent for reopening cold kidnapping investigations through archived hospital records and medical DNA audits. Reporters called it the Dawson Reform. Policymakers called it justice long overdue. Evan never touched the restitution money that came from the Ridge estate.